So the AI Act timeline, the implementation timeline, has went so far as follows. So the 1st of August 2024, the Act entered into force. Then by the 2nd of February 2025, that's the current iteration, there's prohibited practices and AI literacy requirements were added. So this is the prohibited practices that we looked at before, and we look at some of these later as well. So these are, our high risk AI systems. And then the AI literacy requirements state that all of our staff have to know the basics of AI. So the 2nd of August in 2025, there was more things added, so more governance provisions, more penalties, different model rules and things like that. So they have been adding constantly to this AI Act. The full application for high-risk AI systems, that's in the Annex 3 of the Act, and that will be implemented later on this year. And then next year, high-risk systems and regulated products will come into effect. So there's a lot of, there may be some companies that could be at risk, compliance risk, if they're not compliant in, within enough time. So we'll look at some of these high-risk systems and some of the things that maybe your company might need to be prepared for. So what you may need to do now is look at the prohibited practices and AI literacy requirements, because they're already in effect. So it'll be good to do a maturity audit or maturity assessment to see what kind of AI exposure your company has. So the risk classifications, we'll go through them. As I say, there are 4 classifications, and we'll look at some examples of some AI systems that fall within these different categories. So the first one is unacceptable. This is an unacceptable risk. So things like social scoring or AI that can manipulate people, or emotion recognition at work, things like that. So this is essentially AI that threatens safety, livelihoods, or rights. So that's completely unacceptable in the AI Act. We're not allowed at all to use any kind of tools for any kind of purposes like that. Then we have high risk. These are highly regulated, and this is AI in sensitive areas with strict requirements. So this could be things like employment decisions, credit scoring, biometrics, and education. So if AI is being used in any of these areas, then it is highly regulated, and you have certain obligations within the AI Act to follow. You have limited risk then. So this is just being transparent. You have to disclose AI use to users. If you have a limited risk system, so that's things like chatbots, deepfakes, emotion recognition again. So you basically, if you are using for these purposes, then you have to be transparent. They fall into the limited risk category. And then there's the minimal risk. So most of the generative AI tools fall within this, and this is unregulated, so there's no real specific obligations here. Things like spam filters and AI used within video games, stuff like that, where there's not going to be a massive risk, if anything goes wrong. So these are the main categories, or when the EU Act, when we're trying to classify our different AI systems, it all depends on this risk classification. So our obligations will be, either we'll have more or less obligations depending on the risk. So what are prohibited AI practices? So this is Article 5 of the AI Act, and these basically have been banned since the 2nd of February 2025. So things that fall in the prohibited category are things like manipulative or deceptive AI that tries to distort behavior, causing harm. Untargeted facial image scraping from internet or CCTV. Exploiting vulnerabilities like social or economic status or age and disability. Emotion recognition in workplaces and educational institutions, that's prohibited. We're not allowed to use these systems for social scoring, so basically evaluating people. We're not allowed to use them for biometric categorization to infer race or politics or religion or anything like that. Predictive policing based solely on profiling or personal traits. And real-time remote biometric ID in public spaces. There are some exceptions to that one when it comes to law enforcement, but you need to check the AI Act itself to look for the details. So these are the prohibited practices. So you're basically not allowed to use generative AI or any AI tools for any of these purposes. So to make sure that you are compliant, you are required by the AI Act to make sure that you don't have any of these prohibited practices within your company. So we basically need to do an inventory of all AI systems that you're currently using, review each system against the Article 5 prohibited list. So you need to go in, and get the detailed list, document assessment for each AI system, and then identify any systems that may fall into a prohibited category, remove or decommission these immediately, and then review the AI vendor contracts for prohibited uses. Make sure that you're not, breaking your contract with the vendor. Update the procurement policies to exclude prohibited AI, and then train staff on these prohibited practices. So you need to, make the staff very much aware of the things that they can't do. So establish report mechanisms for concerns, and then document compliance evidence for regulators. So this is a handy checklist that you can use to make sure that you are compliant against this part of the AI Act, Article 5. Again, the penalties are quite significant, so it's very it's within your own interest to start doing this work. This is already required by February of last year, so most companies probably have this stuff already done, and you could perhaps find some use cases out on the internet where companies have already maybe documented this process. So the literacy requirements, this is basically all providers and deployers must ensure staff have sufficient AI literacy, taking into account their technical knowledge, experience, education and training. So basically within reason. But there are now, if your company is using an AI product, then you're going to have to train your staff on that. So staff have to have a basic understanding of AI capabilities and limitations, awarenesses of the risks and ethical considerations, and they need to understand your organizational AI policies. So these are some of the things you need to train staff. The users of these systems, they have to be trained to use them effectively and competently. The ability to interpret the outputs critically, and basic knowledge of when human oversight is required when using these tools. For managers, they need to understand the AI governance requirements, the ability to assess the risks associated with these tools, and a knowledge of the regulatory obligations. And then, of course, leadership needs strategic AI understanding, so the regulatory compliance awareness, and the risk management oversight capability. So basically all of the above. So the literacy compliance checklist, some things that you can check. Again, this is required in the AI Act by last February. So some things you need to do is assess the current literacy levels across the organisation, define your role-based literacy requirements, develop or procure AI training, create training schedule for all staff levels, and track training completion and competency. Include the literacy and onboarding for new staff, and establish refresher training requirements. Document training evidence for compliance again, and review and update the materials regularly. This is quite an important one because it's such a fast evolving field. And then measure effectiveness of the literacy program. So try and see, is it improving the AI literacy within your organisation. So this Gen AI training series will help fulfill the requirements under Article 4, giving your staff the basic literacy and allowing them to understand some of the risks involved with AI. So high risk systems, this is the next category down. So these are probably the most regulated. So these are things like biometrics, critical infrastructure, education and training, employment decisions, essential services, law enforcement, migration and asylum, and justice and democracy. So if there's AI tools being used for any of these uses, these are highly regulated under the AI Act. So there's certain things that you need to be aware of whenever you're using these high risk systems, and we'll look at that next. So some of the obligations in the high risk AI systems will be you need a risk management system. Okay, so you need to continuously identify, assess and mitigate the risks. You need to be transparent, so there has to be clear instructions for deployers and explainable outputs as well. Training data must be relevant, representative and error-free, so you have to have data governance as well. And obviously human oversight has to be involved, so you have to design for effective human intervention and control. Technical documentation as well, you have to have comprehensive documentation of design, development and operation of the system. and you need appropriate levels of accuracy, reliability, and cybersecurity. So, for example, if your system is making decisions about hiring employees, then you need it to be accurate, you need it to be reliable, and obviously you don't want it to be hacked. Record keeping, so there has to be automatic logging of events throughout the system's life cycle. And then you need a conformity assessment as well. So you have to get a third-party assessment for certain categories before deployment. Full high-risk obligations apply from the 2nd of August this year. And you can again check the regulation itself to see what constitutes as a high-risk system. So the deadline is August in 2026 to basically make sure and check everything off the list. So time is running out. For some organizations that are using high risk, if they're only starting to do this now, then it's probably they probably will run out of time. But some of the things you need to do is identify all your AI systems that are high risk. So again, this is very similar to the last checklist. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to fly past this. But do note that you need to start to prepare now, because high risk compliance requires significant lead time. So this is the start of April in 2026, and if this is due in the start of August 2026, that's only 4 months, so it's not a lot of time at all.